Hi cookie friends, it's Stephanie from Little Cookie Co. I'm here with another great Christmas tutorial to turn regular shapes into amazing cookies. First off, we're going to do our letter to Santa. So we've got a rectangle cookie shape here, and I'm starting with my outline. If you need a really good royal icing recipe or you're not sure about consistencies, like an outline or a flood and what it should look like, check out my new royal icing tutorial up on my channel now, where I talk all about royal icing. So notice any corner that I'm going, I stop and touch down my bag to get that nice sharp corner and make sure I secure that icing to the cookie. Notice my cookie has some cracks in it. This is because this dough that I used to make this was previously frozen, and so when it thawed and I rolled it out, it kind of ends up a little bit drier. It was rolled a few times, so we get these cracks, but it's not a big deal. It doesn't affect the taste in any way, and you won't really see the cracks, so it doesn't bother me too much. Outlining the edges here a little slower than I'm going to do the middle part. The middle part doesn't matter as much. I just want to be careful on the edges, but I'm trying to move quickly for this cookie, and the reason being is the details are going to be wet on wet, which means while this base layer is still wet, freshly flooded, we're going to go ahead and add our next layer. So I kind of want to work quickly as royal icing starts to dry as it's exposed to air. So kind of working as fast as possible while still trying to keep control. So now that I finished flooding my white, I'm adding my blue details right away, not waiting at all. And I'm kind of going as fast as I can. And this is my flood consistency. So very small lines here, just a little bit of pressure. And I'm just adding lines to the outside with little gaps in between, and we're going to fill that with another color. So the reason why I'm just going a bit quicker here is because I want to make sure that the colors sink into my icing. So I'm using a flood because I want that to sink in easier. If I use my outline, it might just be too thick and sit on top of the icing. And in a moment, you'll see how it turns into a really cool pattern once we use our scribe. So then we're going to go ahead and, almost missed one, but I got it. So we're going to go ahead and use our scribe, and near the edge, I'm going to go around one way. So I'm trying to get just to the edge, and of course they're not all even, so that's okay. Do your best. But you see how the icing's pulling through? And then I'm going to wipe my scribe, and then on the outer edge, I'm going to do the same thing, but the opposite way. I'm just holding my hand there with my left hand just to hold it steady, because it's kind of floating in the air there. And you see how it gives us this great pattern. It kind of looks like those old letters that we used to get in the mail. So I'm going to put this aside to let it dry for a bit, and then we're going to go ahead and add our stamp. So now my base layer has dried enough that I can do another decoration. And you see how this icing is now sitting on top. So this is my outline consistency because I want it to hold those little squiggles in it. And it's kind of sitting on top of my white icing because now my white is pretty much dry. And then I'm going to just fill a little bit of flood in. It's quite loose, so I don't need too much, and I'm just going to spread it with my scribe. And I'm just trying to get it to all the edges there. If you don't have a scribe, you don't have to worry. You can use a toothpick. It always works really well as well. And just remember, if you're going from one color to another while you're using your scribe, just with a damp paper towel, wipe the tip of the scribe so you're not mixing up your colors. I usually have some damp paper towel beside me. That's what I put my icing bags in, so I just use that to kind of wipe my scribe off. And once our green icing is dried a little bit, we're going to go ahead and make a little snowman. So this is our snowman stamp. So I took my outline consistency here, my thick icing, so I have to smooth it out a little bit with the scribe. I don't want to use my flood because I really want to hold the shape of the snowman. So I'm just fixing him up a little bit so he looks nice and even. And then here I'm going to just take a tiny bit of orange icing on the tip of my scribe and make his nose. Now this is a tiny, tiny detail. So I just need a little blob of it. I'm going to touch it down, and the white icing is still a touch wet. It's not fully dry because we just did it. So I'm just going to attach it nicely and then pull it to sort of make it as pointy as I can. Like I said, it's a very, very tiny detail. So I'm just using my scribe to do all the work. And then again, to do the buttons, we're going to do the same idea. Take a little bit of icing on our tip of our scribe Again, you can use a toothpick if you don't have a scribe. I'm just squeezing out just a little bit and just kind of scraping the edge of the tipless bag with my scribe and getting that little amount and just touching it down. And then we got our cute little snowman stamp. Now, of course, we need to address it to Santa. So I've got my edible marker here, and you make sure that your base is fully dry. So you don't want to do this while it's crusted over or maybe a little bit wet still, because your marker will not work very well. And this is a dual tip edible marker that I have that I absolutely love. The black is nice and dark. Sometimes you don't get a really good black pen, and it's a dual tip. So it has a thick tip, which I'm using, and a fine tip. Great for details. And it's linked in the description of my video in my Amazon store. And I just love the way how this turned out. Santa will definitely get our Christmas list with this envelope. Up next, we're gonna make a present cookie. So again, I have my rectangle shape. This is a little bit smaller. You can use any shape, a square, a circle, rectangle. I figured this one we kind of go with the theme of mostly rectangles. And I'm outlining my cookie, again, touching down at any corner, and in between the corners on the long sides, I'm lifting up my piping bag so my icing lays nice and smooth. And then I like to let my outline dry for a few minutes. It doesn't take much. That icing has a lot more powdered sugar, a lot less water in it, so it doesn't take long to dry. It doesn't have to be fully dry, just enough to hold its shape. So when I go and flood, that outline is not going anywhere. The whole purpose of that border that we draw around it, or the outline, is to hold all that flood in, because flood is a lot looser and runny, and if we put on our cookie and we put too much, that will hold it in versus letting it run off the edges. All right, so right away, while my cookie is still wet, I'm gonna go ahead and make a candy cane shape with some red dots. This is my flood icing, and I'm gonna go again back in with my white icing in between those red dots. And I'm using my flood, very little pressure. These are very small dots. And we have a candy cane shape, and what I'm gonna do is along the edges, just drag my scribe down this candy cane and back up, and it gives us this amazing candy cane. I absolutely love this. It's so much fun to do, and it looks so cool. So again, here we go. We're putting our red dots in, then our white. And the reason we want to use our flood here is because we want it to be loose. We want to be able to move it around. And if we're using thick icing, it's not going to kind of drag with the scribe. It'll sort of stay in its place. So that's why we use our flood icing. So here, this is kind of the wrapping paper pattern that we've got. And again, trying to work as quick as I can, because as I go, the green icing is starting to dry a little bit. So it's tough to kind of go at a fast speed when you're decorating cookies, but I keep that in mind, and I have my bags ready to go right beside me so I can switch them out really quickly. If it's easier for you to pipe all the dots and then go around them, that's fine too. Whatever works for you. Always making sure too to wipe the scribe in between, because I've got some green icing on there, so we don't want to mix it up with the red icing and the white icing. And you can see on this last one that my icing isn't quite melting in as it was on the first one. So when I pull my scribe through, it's almost like the mark has been left, because that icing kind of has started to dry, especially near the edges. The edges kind of dry faster than anything else, but that's okay. It still looks pretty cool. And you can see how now my dots are kind of just sitting on top of the icing, taking a little bit longer to sink in. And again, that's just, it will sink in with a little bit of time, but just keep that in mind when you're doing these wet on wet designs. So now that my icing has dried, we're gonna add some details on top. And you can see how cool the pattern looks. It's nice and flat. It looks just like wrapping paper. And then we're just gonna go in with our brown outline consistency. And now you can see it's really holding its shape. It's a thick icing, not going anywhere. And I'm just gonna pipe some string wrapped around this present and finish it off with a little bow. Just taking my time here with my royal icing, letting it fall and kind of guiding where I need it to go and touching it down when I need it to stop. And there we have our present cookie. Next up, we're gonna have our sort of holly looking cookie. This is one of my favorite shapes that I have because it's kind of fun to decorate and has limitless options. So here I'm going to kind of just spread some icing on the base. So normally I do this with a paintbrush that I have, specifically that I use only for cookies, but if you don't have the tools, it's okay. You can use the spatula if you have something like that, back of a spoon, you can use a butter knife, whatever you have. So this will dry really quickly since it's a thin layer of icing. That was my flood that I spread it across, because your outline definitely will not spread like that. And so it takes a few minutes to dry, and then we can do our details on top. So here I'm just using my brown outline, and you can see that it's holding its shape nicely, and we're just putting a couple of branches in. So I'm just sort of following the shape of the cookie, just taking my time. And notice every time that I touch my icing down, secure it to the cookie, and then I lift my bag up. If it's a longer line, I lift it up higher. If it's a very small line, I'm just lifting it up a tiny bit. I'm not dragging my bag along the cookie because I wouldn't get a nice straight line. And so what we're looking for is that smooth line. So when we lift our bag up, the icing falls really, really nicely. So it depends how big or how far your icing is going, the higher you lift it. If it's a very small area, very short strokes, then you want to keep it really close to the cookie. And then we're going with the green icing, and we're just going to add the details of the branches. So this is my outline consistency again. And I like this type of cookie. It's kind of a great cookie to add to a set, like a filler cookie. It's quite easy to decorate. You don't have to wait too long for the steps to dry to do another step. You can kind of do these right one after another. So they're relatively easier, quicker cookies to do, and they complement any set really, really well. So I'm just sort of building the icing on top here until I'm happy with what it looks like. So we sort of start with a V shape, and then I fill a little bit in with the middle. And you can see sometimes I go in to out, out to in. It doesn't really matter. Here I'm just kind of going inwards and pulling my icing. So as my icing kind of touches down at the end there, I'm pulling it away to give it sort of a pointy edge. Want to look a little bit like pine needles here. And just giving you different options of how to build the greenery, whether these kind of single strokes or building them on top of each other. And very light pressure. These are really small kind of lines that I'm doing. So just a little bit of light pressure. A little pressure comes out. I touch the icing down to the cookie and I secure it, and then a little pressure and pull. And then we're going to add some leaves as well here, mixing all the greenery, because why not, right? We can do what we want. It's our cookie. And that's my outline consistency, and I'm going to add a little squiggle in the middle. This will prevent the craters from happening. This area is a little bit small, so if we flood it, we don't want an indent when it dries, so this helps prevent that. And then we're going to load it up with our flood here and smooth it out a little bit so it's nice and even. If you flood while your outline is still wet, you can kind of blend everything in by a little jiggle of the scribe. So that's kind of what I did. I usually let my outline dry, but for these smaller ones, I kind of go in right away because I just find it easier and quicker to do it that way. And then we're going to take our red outline consistency and just kind of hovering the bag right over the cookie, putting quite a bit of pressure on it just to get a nice bubble of icing coming out. And notice I wiggle my bag as I'm piping, and that's just to smooth that ball out as I'm piping it. So I still have to go in with my scribe and give it a good jiggle, but wiggling my piping bag as I'm doing it, it helps to smooth it out as I'm piping it. I notice with the jiggle of the scribe, it kind of becomes nice and smooth and shiny. And just sort of little circles or jiggles back and forth also works as well. And that kind of spreads out the icing to make it as big as I want it to. And you can do different sizes. The more pressure you put, and the closer you are to the cookie, it kind of bubbles out a bit. And this makes a nice puffy holly ball, I guess you could say. And then, if you're doing a little bit of pressure, you'll end up with a smaller one. So it really depends how much pressure you have with the bag. And it's good practice of, how much pressure to put, how much is too much, how much is too little. And then I'm just going to add a few more branches here in between. I feel like it needs a little something. And then I love to just fill in with a couple of smaller dots. So again, we were putting a lot of pressure before with the big ones. For these small ones, I'm just using a little bit of pressure and touching the icing down. And that's it. Very simple, just adding a few details here and there just to give the cookie a little more dimension. And our final detail here is just a line on the leaves. The leaves have now dried enough for me to pipe on top of them. You can see they're a little bit more dull than they were before. They don't look so wet. And that's our holly cookie. Now we've got our rectangle shape again, but facing the other way. And this is going to be our door cookie. So again, we're going to go in with the outline. I touch down on the corners, and then you can see how high I left my bag because it's a longer line. And you can see the line sort of drooping down, and it lays down nicely on the cookie and keeps it nice and straight. As I come to those corners, I lower my bag down and I touch it to the corner. So it's not like it's up in the air and I just drop my line down. I gently kind of, when I'm 2/3 of the way, I start to lower my bag and connect the icing. So my next step, I'm going to take this blue icing I have, and this is my flood, and I'm just going to spread it on the top half of the cookie. Again, you can spread it with whatever you have in the house. If you need to add more icing to spread it a little bit more, you can do that as well. And then we're going to set it aside to dry for a little bit. And once it's dry, we can continue our details. So this is again my outline consistency, and I'm outlining my window here of the door. So trying my best to keep it as even as possible. If you need to, trace with an edible marker your outline, you can do that as well. There's no problem with that. And then I'm going to add 2 door panels down here. So I'm just trying to line it up with the edge of the windows. So I'm trying to line it up with the edge of the window. So I find it easier to kind of do all the outsides and then do those middle lines just so it ends up as straight as possible. It's freehand, and you know what? It's not going to be perfect, but if I get a cookie that's not so perfect, then I know it's handmade, so I have no problem with that. Now we're going to go in with our same outline consistency that we did all these outlines with, and just do squiggles all around the doors. Now again, the reason for these squiggles is to prevent craters. So if you haven't experienced craters before, consider yourself really lucky. But sometimes what happens is you flood your cookies and then you put them to dry. Everything looks beautiful. The next morning or later on that day, you go back and look at your cookies and you either have holes in them or you have small indents or big indents in them. And those are what we call craters. So this is a great way to help prevent that. You can also have a fan blowing on your cookies very gently. I use a dehydrator. I use it at a very low setting, but it's kind of the same idea as the fan circulates the air to dry the icing quicker. What happens sometimes is that the outer icing, near the edges dries faster, and then the inside is still wet, and so it's kind of heavy, so it sinks down a bit. And so when the icing dries, it has nothing to support it because the inside sort of sink down, and so it just kind of craters in. So the squiggle in the very middle helps just keep it nice and puffy and supported. So I'm just taking my time flooding. I'm doing kind of one section at a time here. So I'm just using really light pressure because these are narrow sections that I'm flooding. And so if I put too much pressure, then I'm going to end up over flooding those sections and it'll go where I don't want it to go. We want to do all the outlines. Obviously we want to leave the blue part blue because that's our window. And those panels, once the icing dries here, we will come back and flood those panels. And that's because we want a separation between the outside of the door and those 2 panels in the front. So now that my icing has dried a little bit, it's crusted over so it's not going to melt into each other. I'm going to add my squiggles and I'm going to carefully flood inside. I'm trying to kind of flood not too much. So you see how much icing is coming out right now? It's not a lot, and that means that I'm not putting too much pressure on my bag, just enough to get the icing out and spread a little bit. And the reason being is I want that icing to kind of have that line around it and not, if I over flood or I put too much, it might just connect to the icing and not really have a dent where that line is. So you can see my left one, there's a nice outline of where that door panel is. And again, if I put too much flat icing, we might kind of get a blurry line or what might not be so defined. So that's why I kind of carefully pipe near the edges there. And as this dries, we can continue to work on it and we can do our wreath. So I'm using my outline consistency brown here, and I'm roughly just doing a circle, and you can see how high my bag is. I'm just letting the icing kind of fall, just guiding it to where I need. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. We're doing those kind of woodsy wreaths, I guess you could say. So while that dries a little bit, we're gonna go and do some other details. So I'm gonna add a mailbox in black here, and this is all my outline consistency here. It's very tiny, I could fill it in with an outline, no problem. And we're gonna add a door handle as well. So again, this is all with my outline consistency. And if your outline consistency is really, really dry, you might struggle in smoothing it out a little bit. So I don't like my outline too thick, because I like to use it for my details as well. And now that our wreath part kind of has dried, we can add the greenery to it. So I'm going to turn my cookie to make it easier for me to pipe it around. So here I'm just doing pressure piping. So holding the bag in one spot, putting some pressure and dragging it back. And that's how I'm making these leaves. So again, touching my bag down, putting pressure in one spot, and then as I let go of the pressure, I kind of pull the bag down. And it's a little bumpy. Where the window is lower, where the wreath is higher. So I'm trying my best, and some of it's kind of down, some of it's up, but I just keep going with it, and we're gonna fill it in, and it's gonna look great after. And again, very, very small strokes here with my tipless bag, just pulling the icing, a little bit of pressure. These are very small lines, and just adding some greenery to fill in some of the wreath here. And again, just showing you different techniques. You can do pressure piping all around the wreath, or you can do, these little lines and add, the kind of pine needles all around. You can mix it up. And then of course, we're gonna add our holly. So this is my red outline consistency, and just doing groups of 3. Here, I think it looks kind of nice to add a pop of color, and it makes it really Christmassy as well. So anywhere you think you might need an extra, dot or add some color, you can fill it in, and it really brings the wreath to life. I think it looks amazing. So that was our door cookie. And next up, we have a fun Christmas light cookie. So this is just the shape that I like to use. It's a good generic shape for anything really. So I've used it a lot, but any shape really works here. So we go ahead and outline our cookie. I'm careful to touch down on those corners. And once my outline dries, I can go ahead and do my flood. So you can see where the point of my bag is versus where the outline is. So I'm bubbling that icing out because my tipless bag is hovering over, and the pressure of the icing comes out, makes it bubble away. So you can see that the width of the icing coming out compared to my tip is quite wide. And again, that's because I have the pressure on the bag. And as I move inwards, I put more pressure on my bag, and I can move a little bit faster, and more icing comes out, and it kind of fills it up quicker. You can see this icing is a little bit thicker than my normal flood because I have to give it a good wiggle with the scribe. But again, it smooths out really, really nicely. And then once the icing is dry, we can add our details. So I've got my black outline consistency, the same that we did the details on the door with. And just gently across the cookie, you can see I'm lifting it up. I'm letting the icing fall nicely, just kind of guiding it. I'm not pulling it tight. I'm letting it droop down just to get those nice straight lines. And then I'm going to go add my Christmas lights. Of course, we've got green. So this is my green outline consistency. And I'm just putting a little bit of pressure in one spot and kind of dragging it a touch down just to make them not quite round, but a little more oval shape. And you can see I've got the piping bag in my one hand, in my right hand, and I've got my left finger against the piping bag and kind of my hand, and that sort of steadies when I'm doing these type of smaller details. It helps steady my hand and my bag. So you have to kind of find a way which works best for you when you're piping. So whatever feels comfortable to you, if you need your hand rested against something or your forearm, whatever works, you can try different techniques out. It doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Whatever gives you the best results, that's how you should be decorating. And sometimes it just comes by trial and error, and you figure it out as you do more cookies. Then I'm going to go in with my yellow outline and add kind of the same. Again, just adding a little pressure and dragging the bag, very small movements here. But I want to make sure that it's attached to the black line, and I'm filling all the ones in between. Some go up, some go down, just kind of random colors here. And again, it's a nice filler cookie if you're not sure what to do and you need another cookie for a set, or kind of an easy one to do to fill a set. This is a great idea, and it looks great with all the other cookies. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. There's a lot more Christmas videos on my playlist. Make sure you check it out, and we'll see you in the next video. Happy baking!